Welcome to part 3 of House of Stone. Our tour guide is very good and he's explaining what they think these different little rooms were for, and it's really uncertain for exactly what they were for. He said it's very easy to say that they were storage rooms, but that may or may not be right. It's just plain unknown. There were some tools found in these that some of the early settlers got in there and stole the tools out of these places and sold them to Europe and different places. So that's why they put the 1890 or somewhere in there antiquity law in, which still stands today. So you're not allowed to take the tools from a place like this. So a bunch of stuff is missing, all sorts of pots and stone axes and different tools. There was only one way of accessing this spot where we are, and that's through the tunnel, so there was restricted access. So it's thought that maybe they restricted the access for a reason, and behind us we see some of the toe holes where you would climb up, hand and toe holes, where you would grab hold to climb up into a different area of the structure. There was a 20-year drought here, and it's thought that maybe they had to restrict the access, build in the cliffs, and restrict the access just to prevent theft of their grains and stuff they had stored. This is totally amazing. The height of some of these structures that are all built of stone, the amount of stone they had to pack in here to these cliffs is totally incredible. Plus, they had to pack a lot of clay in for mortar between the bricks. And this place has little balconies on it, and I did bump my head on the balcony. And we can look over and see this is a kiva right in front of us, and they were used for worship purposes. Each site seems to have a few kivas, and they had a roof on them and then a ladder that went down right in the center of it. And at the bottom of the kiva, they built a fire, and it had a ventilation shaft, and there was always a rock there for a deflector for the kiva. This must have been a really fun place to grow up. Lots of kids around and lots of playing and carrying on. And ahead of us is their inscription on the wall, and that's an authentic old inscription of water. And this design is found in other sites down south, so they feel that maybe the people from here moved on further south when they were faced with the drought and other things that caused them to have to leave here. The water is in the form of a seep spring, and they put different sacred items in the seep spring just so it would keep going, because without water they couldn't have existed here. And they had pottery so they could store their water in their stone jug. The concept was that if someone were to pass on, they supposedly came from the earth, so the best thing to do is bury them back in the earth, and they were buried very close to where the people lived. Right below, under some big boulders, is one of the spots where some were buried. So they always kept them nearby instead of putting them off someplace in a cemetery where you'd rarely visit. You could visit them every day if you wanted, and this was very important to these ancient. By looking over the railing, we can see where their burials were down below. And so they were always very close to the family. Sometimes they were in small vaults in the structure itself, but in this case, there's some big boulders down below, and they buried them under these big boulders in their pre-Christian period of time. Through numerous passageways we go, and then pretty soon we come to a spot where you have to put your feet and hands in little holes to go on up. And he says if you start out on the wrong foot, that you're in trouble. And then later he said, no, it doesn't make any difference. That's just a joke. But this was an incredible place. I couldn't believe that we were actually in a spot that was inhabited that many years ago by Stone Age man. As we go through the dark corridor ahead of us after climbing up and turning to the left, we go through a dark corridor, and he says if you watch real careful on some of the carving built up on the walls, you'll be able to see the handprints of the people as they plastered the mud on the side of the wall with their hands. A real neat thing to see. As we move through here, we can look down and see one of the kivas, the little stone wall like that's in the center. That was a deflector for the winds because it would develop its own wind. And then the little hole in the center was their fire ring. And we just looked through the window there, and now we can see the other side of the wall. And it's thought that these walls went clear up to the cliff above, so the whole alcove was walled in, and some of this has tumbled down. Our guide gets a little nervous about some of the kids getting too close to the edge. He doesn't want anyone to fall into one of the kivas. From the point where we're standing, we get a really good look down in the kiva. The little pillar-like things on the side where to rest the roof on, and then the circular hole is, of course, the fire pit, and the tiny little wall standing freely down is the deflector for the drafts. The lower levels of the kiva we're looking at were carved out of solid sandstone with stone tools, and they did such an excellent job there isn't even much in the way of tool marks. They apparently sanded it down. We now stand at an area where it was apparently their work area, and there's all sorts of grinding tools for grinding the corn and various other things that needed to be ground for meal preparation. And this was probably all done by the women, while the men did other things like farming and hunting and building structures. In its heyday, this place must have been a very elaborate sort of a place to live, and so probably it was a really great lifestyle for these people that inhabited the site. Plus, it was very safe being built in a cliff from raiders and things that might come by. The first non-Indian people that came in here had no respect for it. They stole a lot of things out of it, and also there were numerous ladders in here that they took up. They took them out of here. Whether they used them for firewood and burned them, it's unknown, or did something else with them. But as we move along, we can see all sorts of little bins and little openings that we have no idea what they're for this day and age. After our tour, we go up on top and see some of the remains of the places where they lived before they moved down into the cliffs. For whatever reason, they felt the need to move down in the cliffs. It may have been strictly for security, as the climate got harder and harder to grow their food that they needed, and there was always, at that point in time, they were living right on the edge, and there was always the danger of raiders coming in and stealing their food. Up on top, they lived mainly in pit houses, and these have been dug out recently by modern archaeologists, and they've put signs up telling about what they found in the pit houses. There's even a little bit of post left in the post holes where they've excavated it. We can look over the railing around it and see in these pit houses. As we look down from above, we see what is known as Cliff Palace, and it's a structure built right in an alcove with right under a cliff, and it had uh, approximately 100 to 120 people lived here, and they have about 20 kivas here for their worship and ceremonial events. And it is a real fantastic looking place. Cliff Palace is what you would call a real classic looking structure built of stone under in a little alcove under a cliff. I think I even read about this many years ago in my textbooks in grade school. And so it's something that I definitely really needed to go see.